I built the copper vine with my bare hands. 23 years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice. When my own blood made a reservation through his assistant, requesting the best table at my own restaurant, I realized something had to break. What happened next changed everything between us. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments section where you're watching from, so I'll know how far my story has gone. I can still feel the weight of that first brick. August 2001. Portland's Pearl District wasn't pearls yet, just rust and broken glass, the kind of neighborhood where ambition went to die. But I saw something else. I saw my father's hands, flour-dusted and certain, moving across a cutting board in our Baton Rouge kitchen. I saw the way he'd transform a handful of nothing into something that made strangers weep into their gumbo. A man who can feed people, he told me once, never goes hungry. Not in his belly, not in his soul. I was 19 when he said that. 42 when I finally understood. The building on Northwest Gießen had good bones. 1920s brick, high ceilings, windows that caught the afternoon light like they were thirsty for it. The landlord thought I was insane. A black chef from Louisiana with a dream and a small business loan, trying to plant roots in soil that hadn't been kind to dreamers who looked like me. I signed the lease anyway. For 6 months, I was carpenter, plumber, electrician, and cook. I laid every tile in that kitchen by hand, grouted them on my knees while my back screamed. I salvaged the wood for the bar from a demolished church in Selwood, some builder's chapel becoming my cathedral. The brass light fixtures came from an estate sale in Lake Oswego. I polished each one till I could see my father's face reflected back at me. My wife Diane would bring me dinner at midnight, stepping over sawdust and paint cans. She never asked if I was sure. She just handed me a thermos of coffee and kissed my forehead. Her faith a louder answer than words. I built the wood-fired oven myself, brick by brick, following a design my father had sketched on a napkin 30 years earlier. He never got to build his own restaurant. Diabetes took his legs first, then his heart. But his dream didn't die with him. I carried it across state lines, across decades, across every doubt that whispered I wasn't enough. The night before we opened, I stood alone in the empty dining room. The chairs were arranged, the menus were printed, the kitchen gleamed like a promise about to be kept. I hung a photograph above the corner booth. My father and me, his arm around my shoulders, both of us covered in flour and grinning like fools. I didn't build a restaurant. I built a promise. A promise that excellence could bloom in overlooked soil, that a boy from Louisiana could claim his corner of the world and make it sing, that my son Bryson, sleeping in his crib that night, dreaming whatever 3-month-olds dream, would grow up knowing his father was a man who built legacies, not just businesses. The Copper Vine opened on a rainy February morning in 2002. 12 customers that first day. Within 3 years, we had a 6-week wait list and a James Beard nomination. I thought I'd built something unshakable. I didn't know yet how easy it is for the people you love most to forget the weight of that first brick. Bryson was 4 when he first held a chef's knife. Not a real one, I wasn't reckless. A small paring knife with a rounded tip. His tiny fist wrapped around the handle while my hand covered his, guiding the blade through a soft tomato. His face lit up like Christmas morning when the slice fell clean. "I did it, Dad. I'm a chef like you." God, I wish I could bottle that moment. The weight of his trust, the pure, unfiltered pride in his voice. He grew up in that kitchen. While other kids spent summers at camp, Bryson learned to brunoise carrots and deglaze pans. He'd stand on a milk crate beside me during Saturday prep, his questions endless. Why does garlic burn faster than onions? What makes the crust crispy? Can I try the sauce? I taught him that cooking wasn't just following recipes, it was understanding transformation. How heat and time and patience could turn separate ingredients into something greater than their parts. How feeding people was an act of love, even when they were strangers. "You're teaching him a gift," Diane would say, watching us work side by side. I thought I was teaching him a language we'd always share. The shift happened slowly. So slowly I didn't notice until the distance was already an ocean. High school brought AP classes and college counselors who spoke about Bryson's potential, like the restaurant was somehow beneath it. Stanford accepted him early decision, full scholarship, pre-business track. I was proud. Of course I was proud. But something in his eyes had changed. The kitchen started feeling like a chore, not a sanctuary. "Dad, I have to study. Can someone else do prep today?" Someone else. As if the work we'd shared for 14 years was suddenly delegable. After graduation, he moved to San Francisco, consulting job at some firm with a name like a law office, Whitfield and Associates. 6 figures straight out of college. He'd call every few weeks, his voice distracted, the sounds of traffic or conference rooms bleeding through the phone. "That's great, son. I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Dad. Hey, I gotta jump. Client meeting. Let's catch up soon." Soon never came. Last Christmas, he sent a gift basket from some upscale company. Imported olive oils, truffle salt, aged balsamic, things I could source better myself. The card was printed, his assistant's handwriting on the envelope. I haven't told Diane how much that hurt. Now he's in Portland for work, transferred 6 months ago to open a regional office, and I see his life in fragments through Diane's phone. LinkedIn updates about promotions, Instagram stories at downtown cocktail bars I've never heard of. He lives 20 minutes away and visits twice a year, always rushed, always checking his watch. Last month, he stopped by the house in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first month's rent on the restaurant. We sat in the living room like strangers, making small talk. He didn't ask about the copper vine, didn't ask if I still cooked. He looked at me like I was a chapter of his life he'd outgrown. I wanted to ask him, "When did I become too small for you?" But I already knew the answer. Somewhere between the paring knife and the business card, my son stopped seeing me as a chef. He started seeing me just as a cook. Success isn't free. I just didn't realize I'd be paying the bill for the rest of my life. Those first 5 years after opening, I lived at the Copper Vine. 16-hour days that bled into 18, then 20. I'd arrive before dawn to meet suppliers, stay past midnight reconciling books and prepping for the next service. The restaurant breathed. I made sure it never stopped. Bryson's 6th birthday fell on a Saturday, our busiest night. I promised I'd be home by 8 to blow out candles. At 7:30, our sous chef sliced his hand open on the mandolin. I spent the evening running the line, directing ticket orders, my phone buzzing in my pocket with messages I couldn't answer. I got home at 11. The cake sat untouched on the counter, 6 candles melted into colorful wax puddles. Bryson was asleep. Diane sat in the dark kitchen, her face unreadable. She said, "He waited for you. For 3 hours he sat at that table and waited." I opened my mouth to explain the emergency, the chaos, the impossible choice between disappointing 50 customers or disappointing my son. But Diane held up her hand. She said, "There's always a reason, there's always an emergency, but he's 6 years old, And tonight he learned that strangers eat before he does. I told myself it was temporary, that once the restaurant stabilized, once we built the reputation, once the James Beard nomination turned into financial security, then I'd have time. Then I'd be present. The nomination came, the security came. The time never did. Diane asked for a separation when Bryson was 12. Not because she stopped loving me. That's what made it worse. She loved me enough to let me choose. The restaurant or the marriage. The dream or the family. I chose wrong. She moved to Seattle for a teaching position. We never divorced. She said there was no point. We were already living separate lives. Bryson stayed with me during the school year, spent summers with her. He never said he was angry, but I felt it in the silence between us. The way he stopped asking me to come to his basketball games. The way he'd eat dinner in his room instead of at the table. I gave everything so he'd never have to. I worked myself hollow so Bryson could have choices I never did. College funds, opportunities, a life beyond survival. I wanted him to reach higher than I did, to never know the weight of making rent or choosing between fixing the walk-in cooler and buying new school clothes. But somewhere in all that sacrifice, I forgot to show him why it mattered. I built him a foundation and wondered why he couldn't see the blueprint. Now he looks at me and sees a man who chose work over family. He's not entirely wrong. I sat in the back row at his Stanford graduation. Not because I arrived late. I'd been there since dawn, watching the venue fill with families who looked like they belonged in those seats. Families whose children probably hadn't grown up smelling like fryer oil and dish soap. I wore my only suit, the same one I'd worn to the James Beard ceremony, and I felt every bit the outsider I'd always been in Bryson's new world. When they called his name, Bryson Alexander Crawford, Bachelor of Science in Economics, cum laude, I stood up so fast I nearly knocked over the grandmother beside me. My hands shook as I clapped. My throat burned with pride and something else I couldn't name. He walked across that stage like he owned it, confident, polished. Nothing like the 4-year-old who used to hide behind my legs when strangers talked too loud. Afterward, in the crowd of graduates and parents, I found him surrounded by friends I'd never met. Classmates with names like Fletcher and Sutton. Kids whose fathers wore watches that cost more than my monthly food budget. "Dad, you made it!" Bryson hugged me, quick and efficient. Then he turned to his friends. "This is my father. He owns a restaurant back in Portland." Owns a restaurant. Like it was a footnote. Like the copper vine wasn't the reason he never had to choose between textbooks and groceries. I shook hands, smiled, made small talk about the ceremony. The whole time, I felt myself shrinking. Bryson's phone buzzed. "Sorry, Dad. Group dinner reservation. Celebratory thing. We've had it planned for months." "Of course," I said. "Go. Celebrate. You earned it." He hesitated for a half second. "You could come if—" No. This is your night. Go be with your friends." I drove 8 hours back to Portland alone, the passenger seat empty except for the stadium cushion that I'd brought and never used. The job offers came fast after graduation. He took the one in San Francisco, Whitfield and Associates, strategy consulting, the kind of work I didn't fully understand even when he tried to explain it. His starting salary was more than I'd made in my best year at the restaurant. Phone calls turned to texts. Texts turned into occasional check-ins. "Busy week. We'll call soon." Soon stretched into months. I'd send pictures sometimes. A new dish I was working on, the restaurant after a rare snowfall, the photo of him and me when he was 8, both of us covered in powdered sugar for making beignets. He'd reply with a thumbs-up emoji. When he transferred to Portland 6 months ago, I thought things might change. Proximity would rebuild what distance had eroded. But he moved to the Pearl District, my neighborhood, the one I helped gentrify with my own sweat. And I barely saw him. He chased a world I could never afford to visit, and I realized, with a kind of clarity that comes too late, that I'd built him a ladder to climb away from me. I was proud of him. God, I was so proud. But pride doesn't keep you warm when your phone doesn't ring.
3 years ago, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I stepped back from the Copper Vine. Not fully. I still owned it, still managed the business side, still reviewed every menu change and supplier contract. But the daily operations, the floor presence, the 16-hour days, I handed those to Cameron. Cameron Torres came to me through a mutual friend in the Portland restaurant scene. Former sommelier turned general manager, the kind of person who could read a dining room like sheet music. He had the warmth I'd built the restaurant on, and the organizational mind I'd never quite mastered. "You sure about this?" he asked the day I offered him the position. "The Copper Vine is you. Everyone knows that." Maybe that's the problem," I said. The truth was simpler and more pathetic than I wanted to admit. I was testing something. If I created space in my life, if I suddenly had time for phone calls and visits, time to be the father I'd failed to be during Bryson's childhood, would he notice? Would he fill that space? I started calling him on Tuesdays. His assistant answered most of the time. I texted about meeting for lunch. He'd respond days later, swamped with the Henderson account. Rain check? I showed up at his office once with takeout from a Thai place he used to love. The receptionist told me he was in Seattle for a client presentation. I'd forgotten he'd mentioned it, or maybe he hadn't. 6 months passed, then a year, then 2. Bryson never asked why I had more free time, never questioned why I wasn't at the restaurant every night, never seemed to register that the father who'd been absent his entire childhood was suddenly desperately available. Cameron would call me about small decisions, a supplier wanting to renegotiate, a kitchen equipment upgrade, whether to extend the bar menu. I appreciated the updates. They made me feel tethered to the place that had defined me for 2 decades. But they also reminded me of what I'd learned. The restaurant ran fine without me. My son's life ran fine without me. I'd spent 20 years believing I was indispensable, and it turned out I was just in the way. So I settled into this new rhythm. Silent partner, distant father, a man watching his legacy thrive while his family withered. Diane noticed. She always noticed. "You're torturing yourself," she said during one of our occasional dinners, "waiting for him to realize what he's missing." "I'm not waiting for anything," I lied. She touched my hand across the table. "Yes, you are, and it's breaking my heart watching you." I didn't tell her that my heart was already broken. I was just waiting to see if anyone would notice the pieces. The email arrived on a Monday afternoon. I was in my home office reviewing quarterly reports when my phone chimed. Cameron's name flashed across the screen, but the message wasn't from him. It was forwarded from the restaurant's reservation system. "Good afternoon. I'm writing on behalf of Mr. Bryson Crawford of Whitfield and Associates. We'd like to reserve a table for 6 guests this Thursday, October 17th at 8 p.m. Mr. Crawford will be hosting important clients and requests your best available seating. Please confirm availability at your earliest convenience. Best regards, Mallory Chen, Executive Assistant to Bryson Crawford." I read it 3 times. Then I sat back in my chair and laughed. The kind of laugh that has nothing to do with humor and everything to do with absurdity. My son, my own son, making a reservation at my restaurant through his assistant, requesting best available seating like he was some stranger trying to impress clients. He didn't know. 23 years I'd owned the Copper Vine. 2 decades of building something that became a Portland institution, a restaurant written up in Bon Appetit and the Oregonian, a restaurant with a 6-week wait list and a reputation that stretched beyond the Pacific Northwest. And Bryson had no idea it was mine. I pulled up his Instagram, something I did more often than I cared to admit, searching for glimpses of the life he didn't share with me directly. His recent posts showed the polished version, him at networking events, shaking hands with executives, standing in front of glass towers with captions about growth and innovation. Not a single photo of the Copper Vine. Not a single mention that his father had built something worth mentioning. Of course he didn't know. Why would he? We barely spoke. And when we did, he never asked about the restaurant, never asked about anything that mattered to me. To him, I was just the old man who used to cook, the father whose world he'd outgrown. My finger hovered over Cameron's number. I could call him right now. Tell him to give Bryson the corner table, the one under the photo of my father and me. Make sure the service was flawless, maybe even stop by to say hello. Watch Bryson's face when he realized whose restaurant he'd chosen. But something stopped me. Pride? Hurt? Maybe both. I typed out a message to Cameron. Treat them like any other reservation. Standard service, no special attention. And don't mention my name unless someone asks. Cameron replied immediately. You sure about this? I stared at the screen. No, I wasn't sure about anything anymore. But I typed back anyway. Positive. Let's see how this plays out. Thursday couldn't come fast enough.
Thursday night, I wore the suit. The tailored charcoal one Bryson once said made me look professional, like I needed his permission to claim respectability. I'd skipped dinner. My stomach was a knot of anticipation and something darker I didn't want to name. The Copper Vine glowed against the October darkness when I arrived. The exterior lights cast warm amber across the brick facade, and through the windows I could see the dining room in full swing, every table occupied, the soft murmur of conversation and laughter spilling onto the sidewalk. 23 years, and it still took my breath away. I pushed through the entrance, and the scent hit me first. Rosemary and brown butter, wood smoke and wine. The olfactory signature I'd spent years perfecting. The host stand was managed by Sierra, a graduate student who'd been with us for 3 years. Mr. Crawford! Her face lit up. We weren't expecting you tonight. I'm just observing, I said quietly. Cameron know I'm here? I'll text him. She glanced at her reservation screen. We're fully booked. Standing room only at the bar. Good. I scanned the dining room, looking for the table I knew was his. The 8 o'clock party of 6? They arrived yet? She checked her tablet. Just seated 10 minutes ago. Corner booth. Of course, the corner booth. The best table in the house. The one beneath the photograph. I moved through the dining room slowly, nodding to familiar faces. The Hendersons, regulars who came every anniversary. The Chens, who drove in from Salem once a month. A young couple on what looked like a first date, nervous and hopeful. These were my people, not by blood, but by bread. Cameron emerged from the kitchen, his eyes finding mine immediately. He crossed the floor with the easy confidence of someone who belonged here, because he did. I'd made sure of it. You're really doing this, he murmured, standing close enough that his voice wouldn't carry. I'm really doing this. He's at table 12, hasn't looked up from his phone except to order wine. Cameron paused. He didn't recognize Maya when she brought the bread. Maya, our head server, the one who'd worked here since Bryson was in high school, who used to sneak him cookies when he'd visit after school. Something cold settled in my chest. I said, "Keep everything normal. I'll be at the bar." I took a seat at the far end where I had a clear sight line to table 12. Bryson sat at the head, animated and confident, gesturing with his wine glass, while 5 people in business attire listened with the practiced attention of subordinates. He wore a navy suit that probably cost $3,000. His hair was cut sharp, his posture commanding. He looked successful, powerful, like a man who'd made it. Above his head, just slightly to the left, hung the photograph. My father and I, opening night, 2002. 2 men covered in flour and joy, arms around each other, building something that would outlast both of us. Bryson hadn't glanced at it once. I ordered a whiskey I wouldn't drink and waited for the moment everything would change.
From my seat at the bar, I had a perfect view of table 12. Bryson held court like a king among courtiers. His colleagues, 3 men and 2 women, all sharp-dressed and sharper-eyed, laughed at his jokes with the calculated enthusiasm of people whose bonuses depended on it. Maya approached with menus, her smile warm and professional. I watched Bryson barely glance at her as he waved toward the wine list. "We'll start with the Willamette Valley Pinot, 2019 if you have it." He didn't ask, didn't say please, just assumed compliance. Maya nodded. "Excellent choice. That's from Brooks Winery." "Great, thanks." He cut her off, already turning back to his guests. I watched Maya's smile tighten fractionally before she retreated. She'd known Bryson since he was 14, used to ask him about school, sneak him extra desserts. Now she was invisible to him. The wine arrived. Bryson made a show of tasting it, swirling the glass with exaggerated expertise he'd probably learned from YouTube. "Decent," he pronounced, like he was doing us a favor. I gripped my whiskey glass hard enough to hurt. The appetizers came next. Seared scallops with corn puree, my father's recipe updated with local ingredients. I'd perfected that dish for 5 years, adjusting the acid balance until it sang. One of Bryson's colleagues, a woman with silver hair and calculating eyes, took a bite and closed her eyes appreciatively. "Bryson, this place is incredible. How did you find it?" He leaned back, casual arrogance radiating from every gesture. "I make it my business to know the best spots. When you're entertaining high-value clients, you can't take them just anywhere." He gestured broadly at the dining room. "This is the kind of place that sends a message. We're serious. We're established. We appreciate quality." We appreciate quality. As if he had anything to do with it. Another colleague, younger, nervous, fumbled with his fork and knocked a water glass. It didn't spill, but the sound drew attention. Bryson's expression shifted, just for a second, into something cold. "Careful, Trevor," he said quietly. The table laughed, but it wasn't kind laughter. Trevor's face flushed. He mumbled an apology and stared at his plate. I watched Bryson scan the room with proprietary satisfaction, like he'd built this place with his own hands instead of just making a reservation. Then came the entrees. Maya and another server delivered the plates with practiced choreography. Braised short rib, pan-roasted duck breast, my signature lamb with rosemary gremolata. Each dish placed with care, each garnish positioned exactly as I'd designed years ago. Trevor reached for his fork eagerly, probably starving, probably too intimidated to eat properly all night. Bryson's hand shot out, gripping Trevor's wrist. His voice dropped low, intimate with cruelty.
Don't embarrass us. Just eat. The words hit me like a fist. Trevor froze. The table went silent for half a breath before someone forced a laugh, and the conversation resumed. But I saw Trevor's shoulders hunch, saw him pick up his fork with trembling care, saw him take smaller bites than hunger demanded. I knew that shame, had carried it myself through 1,000 rooms where I didn't quite fit, where my accent was too thick and my shoes not expensive enough. And now my son who I'd sacrificed everything to lift above that shame, was wielding it like a weapon against someone who reminded him of me. I was halfway through my untouched whiskey when Maya appeared at my side. "Mr. Crawford," she said softly, her back to table 12. "Can I get you anything? You haven't eaten." "I'm fine, Maya. Thank you." She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Bryson's table and back. "That's him, isn't it? Your son?" I nodded once. Her jaw tightened. "He didn't recognize me. I used to bring him hot chocolate when he'd do homework in the back office." "People forget," I said quietly. "It's not personal." Her look told me we both knew that was a lie. She squeezed my shoulder briefly before returning to the floor, and I watched her weave through tables with the grace of someone who understood this space as intimately as I did. Across the dining room, Cameron emerged from the kitchen doing his customary check-in rounds. He stopped at neighboring tables first, inquiring about meals, ensuring satisfaction, his presence exactly what a general manager's should be. Attentive without being intrusive. Then he approached table 12. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Cameron Torres, the general manager. I wanted to personally ensure everything is meeting your expectations tonight." Bryson looked up, and I saw him shift into his professional persona, the one he wore like armor. "Everything's been solid," Bryson said with a magnanimous wave. "You run a tight operation here. I've been coming to high-end establishments for years, and this is definitely top tier." Coming for years. He'd been in Portland 6 months, and this was his first time here. Cameron's smile never wavered. "We're honored to have you. Is this your first visit to the Copper Vine?" "It is, actually, but definitely won't be the last. I'm always scouting places for client dinners." "Wonderful. Well, if there's anything at all you need, please don't hesitate." Cameron's eyes drifted almost imperceptibly to the photograph on the wall behind Bryson. One of Bryson's colleagues, the silver-haired woman, followed Cameron's gaze. She squinted at the photograph, her head tilting slightly. "Is that a family photo? That's a lovely touch." Cameron smiled. "The owner and his father, opening night 2002. "How wonderful," she said. "Is the owner here tonight? I'd love to compliment him personally." Bryson cut in before Cameron could answer. "I'm sure he's busy. These hands-on owner types are usually in the kitchen micromanaging everything." He laughed, and his colleagues obliged him. Cameron's eyes met mine across the room for the briefest moment. "Actually," Cameron said carefully, "he's not in the kitchen tonight." But Bryson had already moved on, launching into a story about a restaurant in Tokyo where the chef personally greeted every guest. His colleagues leaned in, attention recaptured. Cameron excused himself and headed toward the bar. When he reached me, he leaned close. "This is brutal to watch," he murmured. "It's necessary," I replied. "Is it?" His tone carried the same concern Diane's had. "What are you hoping happens here?" I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but it was too tangled with hurt and hope to articulate. At table 12, Trevor said something that made the others laugh. Genuine laughter this time, not performance. For a moment, his shoulders relaxed. Then Bryson's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, and stood abruptly. "Excuse me, I need to take this." He walked toward the restroom corridor, phone pressed to his ear, and I realized with cold clarity that the confrontation I'd been dreading and craving was about to accelerate.
Bryson returned from his phone call with the satisfied expression of someone who just closed a deal. He was 10 feet from table 12 when Cameron intercepted him. "Mr. Crawford," Cameron said, his voice carrying just enough to turn heads at neighboring tables. "Before you sit back down, there's someone I'd like you to meet." Bryson's professional smile activated automatically. "Of course, always happy to network." Cameron gestured toward the bar, toward me. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 23 years in my knees, my back, my chest. Bryson's eyes passed over me, a flicker of recognition, confusion, then dismissal. He thought I was just another patron, another face in his father's irrelevant world. "Bryson," I said quietly. "Hello, son." His face went through several expressions in sudden succession. Surprise, confusion, then something close to embarrassment. "Dad, what are you—" He glanced back at his table, lowering his voice. "What are you doing here?" "I work here," I said simply. "You what? Since when do you work here?" Cameron stepped forward, his voice measured and clear. "Mr. Crawford has owned the Copper Vine since 2002. He built this restaurant from the ground up." The words hung in the air like smoke. Bryson's mouth opened, closed. His eyes darted around the room, to the servers who'd been greeting me all night, to the framed photograph on the wall behind his table, to Cameron standing beside me with quiet solidarity. You own this place?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "I built it," I corrected, "with my hands. Every table you're sitting at, every dish you just praised as solid." The silver-haired woman at his table had turned in her seat, watching, then Trevor, then the others. The energy in the restaurant had shifted, conversations at nearby tables dying down as people sensed something unfolding. Bryson's face flushed. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question landed with unintentional cruelty. "Tell you?" I kept my voice even, though my heart was hammering. "When exactly? During the phone calls you don't return? The visits that last 20 minutes before you check your watch? The conversations where you never ask about my life?" He flinched. I took a step closer, not threatening, just closing the distance that had grown between us over years. "Your assistant made a reservation at my restaurant. You chose this place to impress clients, to show you no quality." My voice cracked slightly. "You sat under a photograph of me and my father, the man who taught me everything, and you didn't even look at it." Bryson's eyes shot to the wall. I watched him see it for the first time, my father's arm around my shoulders, both of us younger, hopeful, covered in the evidence of hard work and harder dreams. "Dad, you told Trevor not to embarrass you," I continued, and I saw the younger man at the table stiffen with recognition. "You treated him the way people used to treat me, the way you're afraid people might treat you if they knew where you came from. That's not fair. Isn't it?" I asked. "You've spent 6 months in this city, my city, the one I helped build, and you never once asked if I still cooked, never asked what I was doing with my life. You assumed I was just, what, retired? Irrelevant?" The dining room had gone almost completely silent. Even the kitchen noise seemed muted. Bryson's colleagues sat frozen, their expensive meals forgotten. Trevor's eyes were wide, sympathetic. The silver-haired woman looked between us with the expression of someone mentally recalculating everything she thought she knew. "I didn't come here for revenge," I said quietly, feeling Diane's words in my bones, feeling my father's ghost in the walls around us. "This, my son, is my legacy. Not just the business, the people, the craft, the care we put into every single plate." I paused. "You told me not to embarrass you.
But tonight, son, I just wanted to share a meal." The silence stretched. Then Bryson's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't reach for it.
Bryson didn't say a word. He just turned and walked toward the exit, his movements stiff and mechanical. His colleagues exchanged uncertain glances, but none of them moved to follow. They understood, instinctively, that this wasn't their moment. I gave it 10 seconds, then I followed. The October air hit cold and sharp when I pushed through the door. Bryson stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, staring at nothing. The glow from the restaurant windows cast his shadow long across the pavement. "Bryson, how could you do that?" His voice was low, controlled, but I heard the tremor beneath. "In front of my colleagues, my clients, do you have any idea what you just—" "What I just did?" I stepped closer. "I stood in my own restaurant, that's all." "You humiliated me." "I did nothing," I said quietly. "You humiliated yourself." His jaw clenched. For a moment, he looked exactly like he had at 12 years old, fighting tears after losing a basketball game, too proud to let them fall. "You don't understand," he said. "This is my career, my reputation. Those people in there, they respect me. They trust me to lead them. And you think that respect is so fragile it can't survive them knowing your father owns a restaurant?" I asked. "Or is it something else? Are you ashamed of where you came from?" "That's not—" He stopped, started again. "You don't know what it's like. Walking into boardrooms where everyone went to prep schools and summer homes, where they talk about their fathers who are doctors and lawyers and venture capitalists, and you couldn't tell them yours was a chef?" "You're not just a chef, Dad. You're—" He trailed off, and the silence said everything he couldn't. "Say it," I pressed. "I'm what?" His shoulders sagged. "You're the guy who missed my childhood because he was building something. You're the reason Mom lives in Seattle. You're the life I spent 20 years trying not to become." The words should have hurt. Maybe they did, but mostly they clarified. "You're right," I said, and watched his eyes widen in surprise. "I missed things, important things. I chose this restaurant over moments I can never get back." I gestured toward the copper vine behind us. "But I didn't build this for me, Bryson. I built it for us." "That's not fair. Your college fund? This restaurant. Your car when you turned 16? This restaurant. Every advantage you had that I didn't. Every choice, every opportunity. I built them all, one plate at a time, one 16-hour shift at a time." His face twisted with something between anger and anguish. "I don't know how to fix this," he said finally. "Neither do I admitted. "But maybe we start with the truth."
I didn't sleep. I lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, replaying the evening frame by frame. Bryson's face when Cameron said my name, the silence that swallowed the dining room, the way his phone kept buzzing in his pocket while we stood on that cold sidewalk, neither of us knowing how to bridge 20 years of distance in a single conversation. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and made coffee. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, screen dark and silent. I told myself I wasn't waiting for anything, that expecting Bryson to call would only lead to more disappointment. But I checked it anyway, twice, 3 times. Nothing. At dawn, I drove to the Koppelvine. The streets were empty, the city still sleeping off its Friday night. I let myself in through the back entrance, through the kitchen that smelled faintly of yesterday's service, garlic and wine, and the ghost of seared meat. The dining room looked different in morning light, softer. The Chabe stood empty and patient, chairs arranged perfectly by the closing staff. I walked to table 12 and stood where Bryson had sat, looking up at the photograph of my father and me. I don't know if I did the right thing, I said to the empty room, to my father's memory, to myself. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I almost didn't check it, almost let it go to voicemail, afraid of what I'd hear, or worse, afraid I'd hear nothing at all. But I pulled it out. Voicemail from Bryson. My thumb hovered over the play button for 5 full seconds before I pressed it. His voice came through rough, like he'd been awake as long as I had. "Dad, it's me. It's 6 a.m., and I'm sitting in my apartment trying to figure out what to say. I've started this message 4 times. I heard him take a shaky breath. "I'm sorry. Not for last night, or not just for last night. For all of it. For not seeing you. For not asking. For being so busy climbing, I forgot to look down and see whose shoulders I was standing on." Another pause. Longer this time. "I told my colleagues the truth this morning. Sent a group email. Said my father built the Coppervine, that I should have introduced him properly, that I was wrong." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I don't know if you want to hear from me, but if you do, maybe we could have breakfast sometime? Not at the restaurant. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere we can just talk." The message ended. I stood in the empty dining room, morning light streaming through windows I had installed with my own hands, and realized something. Maybe some bridges don't burn. They just need rebuilding. And maybe, just maybe, we'd finally picked up our tools. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of the Coppervine watching Bryson adjust his apron. "It's backwards," I said. He looked down, laughed, and fixed it. "Still getting used to this." Tonight was the charity dinner, a fundraiser for culinary scholarships Bryson had proposed 3 months ago. His idea, his organization. But he'd asked if we could host it here, together. "You don't have to work the line," I told him. "You're hosting. Schmoozing donors is your specialty." "I want to," he said simply. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't burn the roux." I raised an eyebrow. "I've been making roux since before you were born. And yet, you burned it last Tuesday." He was right. I had. And the fact that he'd been here to notice this, that he'd spent the last 6 months showing up on Tuesday evenings to prep alongside me, still felt like a minor miracle. The changes hadn't been dramatic. No movie-worthy reconciliation scene. Just small, consistent steps. Weekly breakfast that turned into longer conversations. Him asking about the restaurant, actually listening when I answered. Me asking about his work, learning to understand the world he'd built for himself. He'd brought Trevor by twice, that young colleague from that night. Turned out Trevor came from a background not unlike mine. Working-class family, first-generation college graduate. Bryson had started mentoring him, teaching him the unspoken rules of corporate spaces, while reminding him not to forget where he came from. The dining room filled quickly. Donors, local chefs, food writers, community leaders. Diane arrived early, hugging us both, her eyes bright with something that looked like hope. Between courses, Bryson stood to address the crowd. I watched from the kitchen doorway. 6 months ago, he began, I learned something that changed my life. I learned that the best restaurant in Portland, the place I'd chosen to impress clients, was built by my father. Scattered laughter, warm and knowing. But more than that, I learned I'd spent years running from the very foundation that made my success possible. I was so focused on building my own legacy, I forgot that legacies aren't meant to be built alone. He glanced toward me. My father taught me something that night, though it took me weeks to understand it. He showed me that respect isn't about titles or salaries or corner offices. It's about recognizing the value in every person's contribution. The chef and the consultant, the server and the CEO. We all build something. His voice steadied, matured. These scholarships are for young people like my father was. Talented, driven, but without the resources or connections to break through. Because the truth is, legacies aren't meant to be inherited. They're meant to be earned, to be shared, and to lift others up. The applause was genuine, sustained. Later, as we cleaned up side by side, Bryson paused mid-wipe of a counter. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, even when I'd given up on us." I squeezed his shoulder. "You're my son. That was never an option."
So here's my question for you. Was I right to handle it this way? Tell me in the comments below, what would you have done in my position? If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more real-life tales, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Because trust me, there's so much more on this channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next life story.